What are your dream reptiles? The ones that are too big or too dangerous or just not practical to have? Well, today I'm going to go over the top 5 dream reptiles that in a fantasy land I would love to own. I'm Adam, you're watching Wicked's Wicked Reptiles. Stick around. Some of these reptiles, even if you're not interested in keeping something that you could probably never keep, might be new to you or at least very interesting. And in this list, it's kind of things that I learned about on the Discovery Channel in my childhood and thought, I like dinosaurs, so these would be cool to keep. And let's just start it off with number 5, one of the big boys, Asian water monitors. Now, if you know what this is, you know why I could never own one. It just doesn't make sense. These things are freaking huge. Usually around 5 feet, but they can get all the way to 9 feet. They are ginormous in terms of lizards. You can find these guys in Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, a few other parts as well. And with these guys, they're going to be mostly in the water, right? Because they are water monitors. So they eat things that are around the water. You know, fish, for example, is one of them. But also, if you had one in captivity, which you can, by the way, they are readily available because they come really small and really cute. And then they often are rescued by big zoos or big reptile stores that have the space because not everybody has space for a giant, 8-foot lizard that's going to need to eat things like pigs, right? In the wild, you're going to see them eat things like jackals and pigs and rabbits and all sorts of things that are going to be really difficult, if not impossible, for you to feed your Asian water monitor. But if you decided that you want to keep an Asian water monitor and you have the right space, that's awesome. But they will need a giant water receptacle. You'd basically need the equivalent of an entire backyard, which is fenced in completely because, believe it or not, they could scale a chain link fence. So you're going to need like chain link on the top of it too. And you'll need a giant area for them to swim in. That's where they like to spend a lot of their time. So it's really impractical because who do you know has a giant like 20-foot by 20-foot pen with a 10-foot by 10-foot pond in it that's completely chain link fenced in? That's, well, I don't know anyone either. You're basically going to have to go to a zoo to see one of these things, a reptile zoo, or someone's private collection where they spend a ton of time and a ton of money taking care of their water monitor. And that brings us to number 4, alligator snapping turtles. Now, I think these guys are awesome because they look like prehistoric dinosaurs. If you look at one of these things, you think immediately this thing is straight out of the Triassic period. I could not believe it when I first saw how big they get either. They get between 175 and 220 pounds. Like the big guys can even get bigger than that. So this is a giant animal. I mean, if you wanted to compare it to something like in the Pokemon world, a Blastoise is as close as you're going to get to one of these dinosaur-looking things. And they've got a lot of bite pressure. These guys you're going to find all through the southeastern part of the U.S. You can find other types of snapping turtles all the way into Canada, but in general, South U.S., their bite pressure, by the way, 1,000 PSI. Up to 1,000 PSI. Just to put in that perspective, a tiger bites at around 1050, 1050 PSI. So barely any less than a tiger. And these guys will crush through your bones because they've got like this beak thing going on with their face. So don't go thinking that you're funny to your friends and start kicking alligator snapping turtle because chances are you're going to be a pirate next Halloween with a peg leg. But if you do want to keep an alligator snapping turtle, it is possible. I mean, outside, same sort of thing with the water monitor we talked about, big water receptacle. And you actually need more water than not. Basically, the entire enclosure should be water with just spots for it to get out. Or you can have an indoor pond, like a giant indoor pond. Like Jay's Prehistoric Pets is the greatest example. I'm not going to use any of the footage because I never got his permission to. But just check out the channel. He's got a giant one that he picks up. It's really cool. But he's got a big indoor enclosure where the thing eats all the fish, basically. They need a giant space. You probably don't have space for them, and if you do, you're going to sacrifice a giant majority of your living space in your house. Oh, one more cool thing about alligator, well, a lot of snapping turtles, the way that they eat their food, or the way that they lure their food in, is they've got this tongue that has a little appendage on it that looks kind of like a worm, and they'll move that worm so that it kind of looks like, well, a worm. And then something will come up close to it, a bird, another turtle, a snake, whatever, and they'll kind of try to grab the tongue and then lights out, alligator snacking turtle, alligator snapping turtle has a meal. Number 3 on the list isn't as big as the other guys, but sailfin dragons are the coolest looking lizard that doesn't get to gargantuan proportions. Some people will call them the Philippine sailfin dragon, and that is true. That's mainly where they're from, the Philippines, but they come from other places too, such as New Guinea, for example, and Indonesia as well, and that's where you're going to see most of the imports come from, because Indonesia will still export some of their animals. The Philippines stopped doing this, I think it was the 90s, and that's why they're very hard to find, especially a true Philippine sailfin dragon. You'll notice that these guys have a very obvious, very cool sailfin looking thing on their tail, and that is why they're called the sailfin dragon. They're semi-arboreal, so you'll need a pretty high enclosure, a big enclosure too, because they don't get to a small size. They get pretty big, but not gigantic. They are semi-aquatic as well, so you need something high with a big water receptacle, and you need to make sure that that water is cycled. You need UVB, you need a breeze as well, because they might get infections in their respiratory system without a steady airflow. So it's actually very difficult to have these guys, even though they don't take as much space as, say, a crocodile or something like that. So, sailfin dragons, very cool, but not for everybody, and they do this really cool thing where in the wild, they will run bipedally, so on their back 2 legs, kind of like, I don't know, one of those Jesus lizards that walks on the water, and then they can go into the water, and to make sure that they're safe when they come up, they can hold their breath for up to an hour. If you have the room, or maybe even an outdoor enclosure, and by the way, when I say outdoor enclosure, I mean you'll live somewhere where you can keep them outside all year long, and you've done your research more than just this video on how to take care of these animals, think about it. I mean, they're all great animals, it's just that they're not really realistic for me, especially being that I live in Canada, and it is the Arctic for half the year here. Alright, so let's move on to number 2, and now we're getting into the really cool, really crazy, really rare stuff. Galapagos tortoises. Now, I know what you're thinking. There's only a few types of Galapagos tortoises because there's lots of subspecies that you can even keep in the US, the UK, Canada, whatever. And even some of those, because they're endangered, you need a permit to keep. Best of luck affording that. And even if you can, the tortoises will cost you like $3,000 a piece or better in Canada if you can find one. Like $8,000 is the only time I've ever seen one, which was available for import and no one bought it, obviously. $8,000 is a lot of money for a Galapagos tortoise. So there's a few that you can actually get, but they are the largest tortoise in the world. They are, I mean, 550 pounds for a Galapagos is not unheard of, and that's not even irregular. You can see these guys that get much bigger than that. We're talking 5 feet long these things are. They can get as tall as like your average 5th grader. Like these are big, big reptiles. But of all the reptiles, they're probably the least dangerous on the list, so that's a plus for them. And they're very similar to a lot of other tortoises. They're not a lot of crazy stuff you have to do to keep these guys. I mean, the walls of your outdoor tortoise pen, which you're going to need, obviously, because how big they get, need to be a little bit higher because, I mean, they can literally step over, you know, a 1.5 foot wall like you'd need for, say, a redfoot tortoise or something like that. So you need a taller wall, but otherwise pretty darn similar to all the other species that we talked about in this video right here. But even if I did have lots of money and I didn't live in Canada, it's going to be very difficult to keep these guys because they're illegal a lot of places. And if you can find them and they're not illegal, you need a permit most likely to take care of them. So that's something, and of course the expensive thing which we went over. And after all that, if you've got all your ducks in a row, good luck finding one. They are very difficult to find. In some areas, a lot easier than others, just like everything else. But, I mean, like in Canada, no chance. Very difficult to find. In the States, a lot easier. The UK, I mean, I did a quick search on some marketplaces, and I could not find anything. If you can find them in those areas, put it in the comments section below. But if not, let's move on to number 1. And number 1 spot of my dream reptiles, if I could have anything at all with no limits, gharials. You want to know why? This is why. Look at them. These things look like dinosaurs that just ate a lemon. They look like they're making this crazy face, very similar to other crocodilians. They are in the crocodilian family. These are critically endangered species. You can only really find them in parts of India and Nepal, and we're talking about select rivers and streams. They're going to spend almost all of their time right beside the water, because unlike most crocodiles and alligators, which actually can gallop pretty quick, these guys just kind of drag their bellies like a really fat dog or something, I don't know. But they don't really have the dexterity in their legs to run like a lot of other crocodilians can. And of course what makes them really interesting is that snout, that jaw, whatever you want to call it, that face. And the reason that it's shaped like this, scientists think, is because they eat a lot of fish. They spend almost all their time in the water, and to catch a fish, which is very fast moving, you need very little resistance, very little drag in the water to smash your face around as quickly as possible. And because those teeth interlock, those fish will be trapped. So even if they don't spear them and they're still alive in their mouth, that's it. It's like trying to get out of a jail cell. It's never going to happen if you're a fish. But they eat other things too, and this is interesting to me. They'll eat things like water monitors. They'll literally eat monitor lizards because they are so darn big. We're talking about 400 pounds, and they can get all the way up to 1,000 pounds. That's the record-ish area for a gharial. But 400 pounds as a regular-sized animal, like that's a dinosaur, man. Like that's a freaking dinosaur. Something else super interesting, kind of curious, is on the end of their nose, the males have gara, it's called. And it's basically like the bulb part of their nose. No one is exactly sure why. People think, scientists is what I mean by people, think they use it to blow bubbles or make noises or vibrations or something when they mate, which takes a long time because they've got to be up to 8 years old before they can be sexually mature. So it's very different than, say, like a leopard gecko, which I can breed at 9, 10, or 11 months. These guys, 8 years until they can start breeding, but that's okay because they're pretty long-lived, and although there's not a ton in captivity that have been there long enough and taken care of properly, to say people in the areas where these guys are found in the wild say about the same lifespan as a human being. As you can tell, I'm fascinated with these guys. I think it was probably a Steve Irwin thing when I was a kid where I first saw them and thought, that is the most ridiculous looking thing. How cool is that? And something else, their eggs are kind of like leopard geckos, which is why I chose to have a leopard gecko for the video, because believe it or not, I don't have a gharial to put on my shoulder, and if I did, that'd be uncomfortable. But just like leopard geckos, you can choose the temperature that you can make the babies because they are temperature sex dimorphic. So the hotter they are, the more likely they are to be a boy. Not an expert, but something I thought was really cool. And that's it. Those are my 5 dream reptiles. I would love to know in the comment section below what your 5 dream reptiles are. And if you like videos like this, and you have an idea that you'd like to see made into a video, put it in the comment section below. Everything I do is because of this channel. The comment sections are where I pull the ideas out of. And if you liked it, hit that subscribe button. I'd appreciate it. Because I do videos twice a week, that means that I'll see you on Thursday.